Recognition, power, and influence is your birthright, and this podcast shows you how to get there. Welcome to episode number 269. In today's episode, I am breaking down exactly what it means to be living and operating from middle management mentality and how you can begin to break free from that mindset instantly to begin to see the ways that you're, well, for lack of a better word, holding yourself back and start to be able to create that freedom in your career even before you change job titles. And it's actually going to get you to that next level of leadership even faster. All right, let's get started. Welcome to Women Changing Leadership. I am your host, Stacy Mayer, and I teach you how to get promoted, get paid, and bring your whole self to the leadership table. I am on a mission to change organizations from the C-suite out because women are the new face of leadership, and we are doing it on our terms. Hello, corporate badasses. Welcome to another episode of Women Changing Leadership. I am your host, Stacy Mayer, and super excited, as always, to be here with you again this week. In last week's episode, I talked to you about the pain and suffering of middle management and why sometimes it can feel a little bit like hell and something that you'll never be able to break out of. But while middle management can feel very overwhelming and frustrating at most times, it doesn't have to be horribly painful all of the time. And there are ways to break out of middle management hell even before you change your title or switch positions or move to a different company. And go back and listen to last week's episode when you have a chance, but you don't have to listen to last week's episode to get a lot of benefit out of this week's episode, where I'm going to be continuing the conversation about middle management hell, but more so from the standpoint of the mindset of middle management and how when we're trapped in that middle management mindset, that middle management mentality, then we are actually making decisions that are keeping us stuck exactly where we are. And when you want to make that transition to go from, let's say, director level to the vice president level, you really need to start doing things differently. You've heard the saying, what got you here won't get you there. And so today, specifically, I'm focusing on those aspects of middle management mentality that are not going to help you transition into higher levels of leadership. All right, so let's get started. So what is middle management mentality? Essentially, what is happening for you is that you're stuck in the middle. In order to explain this, I want to go back to what individual contributor mentality is. All right, so individual contributor mentality is that you got an education, you studied in some way, whether it was practical on-the-job training or you literally went and graduated and got a degree, got a certification in a certain subject matter expertise. And then as you continued to advance in your expertise, you got more and more knowledgeable in that specific area, and then you were rewarded as such. So you did a really great job and you made more money. Maybe you received promotions as an individual contributor or even transitioned a little bit into early levels of management. So they said, wow, you're a really great people person as well as a wonderful individual contributor. So now we're going to give you a team. And so essentially what led to your success and what would continue to lead to your success if you stayed as an individual contributor is quite literally being good at your job. So you can continue to advance and you can make a ton of money. So I live in Silicon Valley and high-level architects make a lot of money. Physicians, MDs that are excellent subject matter experts make a lot of money at biotech companies, right? You can continue these subject matter expert tracks for a lifetime. There is literally nothing wrong with that. But I think what a lot of women that I talk to are craving, and you might be one of them, is to have a little bit more impact, a little bit more say, so that you're not just always being told what to do, but you actually have some influence at the top. You actually have the ability to create change in the process that you're doing versus just like being told what to do and then executing on it. And whether or not you execute on it well or effectively, that results in your ability to be successful. And so if you're one of those kind of people that would like to have just a little bit more say in what actually happens and be able to push back, a lot of times too, there is this ability for the women that I speak to see things differently, to be able to have that bigger view, to think outside of the box, to sometimes even be smarter in terms of the vision than your boss. And you get a little bit frustrated because you start to feel this push pull like, yes, I could execute on this, but to what end? Like, where is this going to get us? This is just a product. And a lot of people feel really frustrated when their products never see the light of day. So you can go all the way to the finish line. You can get your paycheck. Sure, that's great and fantastic. But that project didn't come to fruition. It got canceled or nobody actually cared about it at the end of the day. So that can be incredibly frustrating. And so this desire to transition into leadership is real. But one of the challenges is that in order to transition to leadership, we have to go through the messy middle. We have to go through this muckety muck called middle management. And there is a way to skip through the muckety muck and to make it all the way to leadership and to just go boop on the other side, but you have to literally become a different person. And so one of the really cool things about becoming a different person, or let me explain a little bit what I mean by a different person. So my mom mentioned this to me, like, I think it was like 10 or 12 years ago, but she said, I don't recognize you anymore. And I was like, oh, huh. And I kind of liked that actually, because I knew what she was referring to. And she was referring to a lot of the anxiety that I experienced in my 20s and 30s and the frustration and the struggle and the pushing. And I always wanted more. And these are all really great qualities that I was always challenging myself and I was always making these big moves and big decisions. But along with it came a lot of anxiety, a lot of frustration. And so when my mom said, I don't even recognize you anymore, she meant like, you're just so much calmer. You seem like so much more logical. You seem like you have your head on straight. And surely I get upset all of the time. I mean, even this morning, just a couple of hours ago, I was crying in the kitchen by myself for 10 minutes. And I'm able to move on and record this podcast episode. But my ability to transition away from that, my ability to pull myself out of the anxiety spiral or whatever that might be is so much bigger than it used to be. And I also see my own downfalls. Like I see the ways that I am my own bottleneck. I see the ways that I get in my own way. I'm not always able to solve for those problems, but I have evolved a long way in order to be able to push and find solutions to work my way through it. And so this is what I mean by becoming a different person. And typically that doesn't happen overnight, although it kind of does, because it can take one thought, one shift, one, physical change. And all of a sudden you do really feel like a very different person. And that can be really cool. But over time, it starts to evolve. And so going through this muckety muck of middle management is sort of in some ways a rite of passage. And while it's not a requirement to make it into higher levels of leadership, it tends to be the process that people go through. Now, how long you stay in the muckety muck of middle management is 150% up to you. You can make astronomical leaps. Some people go from an individual contributor role, especially those higher level individual contributor roles, directly into a director level role. You can sit in that director level role and do the stuff. Like if you started in a director level role doing what I'm teaching on today's podcast, you will skip very quickly to a vice president role. Inevitably, it is going to happen because the way that you're showing up. You're not technically showing up as that middle manager, even though you're in a middle management position. So this is what I'm talking about when I talk about middle management mentality and how we can start to break free from that mindset, the way that we're solving problems. So whatever your title is, and also I want to remind you that you can be at the vice president level and have middle management mentality, my friend. Vice president titles are not always the solution. So it's how we're showing up and what we're bringing to the game and how we're engaging with our executive leadership. All right, so the first piece of middle management mentality that's important to break free from is this idea of waiting to be told what to do. So you have a boss, and when you're in middle management, you wait until your boss tells you what to do. So ask yourself, in my last one-on-one, what did it look like in my last one-on-one with my boss? And if those are basically check-ins where you go through your work report and you kind of check off some items and you say, okay, this is what I'm working on. This is what I'm doing. Is this okay? Is this what you want? That sort of default to your boss. Your boss is in charge, telling you what to do all of the time. And you're just sort of waiting for permission in order to move forward. The funny thing is that oftentimes you'll have ideas, but you don't know how to present them. It might look a little bit like, I did present my ideas. This happens a lot. So women will tell me, but I did tell my boss and my boss didn't care. The reason that your boss didn't care or didn't seem to care is because you were trying to do it in the same context of your weekly check-ins. So what I mean by that is you have this middle management mentality is that I wait to be told what to do. And your boss actually has that like you're going to be in middle management mentality for her direct reports as well. And so she just tells you what to do. Same thing happens for you down. So you tend to just kind of tell your team what to do and hope that they execute on it. And maybe you set some parameters in place to hold them accountable. But the reason that you know that this is true is because you get super frustrated when they don't listen to you. You can't quite figure out how to get them to behave. You have these poor performing employees. And then the ones that seem to succeed and be higher performing employees, it's really kind of their own game. It's not because of something amazing that you did. It's because they have more leadership traits. They've broken out of that middle management mentality themselves. And so really, you can actually start there and look at your direct reports and say, which ones of them don't wait to be told what to do? And how amazing is that? And so you're going to start to do the same thing up. When you're breaking free of that middle management mentality, you're not just waiting to be told what to do. You're offering proactive suggestions, outside of the box thinking. But the important thing is that you don't just squeeze it in a complaint session with your boss in a regular one-on-one. You want to actually carve out time for that. You want to actually share your ideas so that your boss can kind of start to see you differently, because you've always been showing up one way and now you have to shift that type of behavior. But this is completely doable. And you can begin to I want you just for now, just for this week, to start to see where are the ways that I'm asking for permission and waiting to be told what to do. Yet I have these ideas and I would like to present them to my boss. And then we can talk about, okay, how do I actually present those ideas and get those ideas actually heard and implemented? But for now, just start to see where are those ways in that middle management mentality. And then how are you doing that top down as well? Just telling your teammates what to do in your direct reports and assuming that they're going to do it. All right, the second piece of middle management mentality is that feedback is golden, meaning everything that I am told by somebody who is above me is true. So where does this come from? It comes from teaching. So school at a very, very young age. And we all know that, psychologically we're imprinted by age 7 and we have our worldview. And that tends to be the way that we see the world unless we are able to create neurological pathways that are different later on in life, which totally happens. And now we know through neuroscience that this is a real possibility and it does work. And I've experienced this myself as I've become a quote unquote different person. But for now, what we're looking at is what are those ways where I'm taking feedback at face value? So, meaning everything that I am told is literal. So, let me give you an example. So, A client of mine, it was just yesterday, I had a phone conversation with her, and she said, my boss told me that she can't stand people who get into a new role and then they just automatically want a promotion, like within the first year. They feel entitled to a promotion in the first year. So her boss said a sentence, and then my client took it as face value. So what you're trying to do when you're trying to break free of that middle management mentality is you're saying to yourself, okay, what are the words behind the words that they're saying? So in this particular instance, her boss said words. Oh, it drives me crazy when people come into a new role and then they just expect a promotion within the first year. What are the words behind the words is that people just feel entitled to a promotion without having to do any work to get there. So unfortunately, my client at first, like within, but I was able to show her how she was doing this middle management mentality and taking her boss's words as face value. So she presents to me, oh, that means I can't talk about a promotion. No, of course not. That is not what your boss said. You just believe that that's true. But what her boss was actually saying is, I can't stand it when people feel entitled to a promotion. Those are two very, 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 very different things. And so when we start to take feedback not at face value, we're breaking free of that middle management mentality. This is so powerful. So the shift that my client was able to do was to say, well, then just don't be entitled. Focus on that word instead as you're continuing to move forward. So I am very clear and I know her boss and I know my client and I know how she shows up. And I'm very clear that my client is going to do an incredible job at her job. And so then her role is what I tell you all the time on this podcast is to show her work along the way. So she has to actually communicate the work that she's doing, the value that she brings to her organization, so that she deserves a promotion and she actually receives it by the end of the year. So it's not that her boss won't promote her by the end of the year. It's just that her boss is saying she doesn't like it when people just feel entitled to a promotion. And so you can feel entitled to a promotion when you're not showing your work, and you can just be really frustrated because you're like, well, can't they see? Can't they see that I did all this amazing work all year and I deserve a promotion? So, okay, now I realize I'm off on a tangent, but going back to middle management mentality is that don't take it at face value. So when somebody says, keep doing what you're doing, that is a terrible idea. If you were supposed to keep doing what you're doing, then you would be promoted. So they don't actually mean keep doing what you're doing. What they're actually saying to you is, I don't really know how to promote you right now, so just keep doing what you're doing. And so when you can read between the lines and not take all of this feedback at face value and say, oh my God, my boss told me keep doing what I'm doing, then you can figure out, okay, what's the 20% that I can do differently so that I can actually show my boss that I'm ready for a promotion while I keep doing what I'm doing. So number 2 is don't take all of the feedback that you're given at face value. This is where coaching comes in, especially coaching by an independent consultant. And I mean this so from the bottom of my heart. If you have an executive coach at your organization who is paid by your organization, the coaching and the feedback that they're giving you is not neutral. It's tainted by the organization. A lot of times they're even coaching some of the executives. So having an independent consultant like me that you have and you hire on your own outside of your organization that you actually pick, that you resonate with, that you say, this person gets me, and they're going to give me truthful advice that actually helps me. I told someone that this was like a managing director, and he was interviewing me to coach one of his direct reports. And he said, what makes you different? And I said, I care more about my client than about your organization. And that matters. And, he probably didn't like that. But in this particular case, it's because I stand behind that. I stand behind all the work that I do, is that I care about you. And so the feedback I'm giving to you is based on your best interest. Whereas the feedback that your boss is giving you especially if you're in middle management, is based on the organization's interest. Of course it should be. They want their job to be easier. They want the organization to make more money. They don't want you to quit. There's all these things that are happening at the same time. And so when they say keep doing what you're doing, they're not thinking about your best interest at heart. They want you to stay. And so you have to be able to start to read between the lines in the feedback chain. And the third thing that is part of middle management mentality that I want you to take away today is this idea that there is a hierarchy. So within organizational structure, and rightfully so, we have people at the top, we have people in the middle, and we have people at the bottom. And this isn't always like financially, that way. Like I already said, you can have high-level individual contributors making a lot more money and having a lot more financial success than the lower-level managers and leaders at the organization. So this isn't a payment hierarchy system. But what it is like a hierarchy in ideas, a hierarchy in influence, a hierarchy in recognition in terms of titles and being included in the conversation. And so we have these people at the top because we cannot have a lot of leaders at the top making decisions. Not everybody can be in charge, because if everybody were in charge, we would get nothing done. So the corporate structure is set up that we have very important people at the top. We have sort of these middle manager people that get tossed around and pushed around. Like I said, this can feel really frustrating. And then we have the individual contributors at the bottom that are quite literally their whole job is hours that they get paid and to be told what to do. And again, this is not saying it's good or bad. It's just saying this is the structure. So first thing is we have to acknowledge that there is this political structure in place. It's a hierarchy structure in order to break free from the hierarchy structure. All right. So there is a hierarchy structure. We have to know it. We can't just be like that woman who says, you know what? I don't care about titles. I'm just going directly to the CEO and it doesn't matter what my boss says. Okay. And we have the right to go directly to the CEO and it doesn't matter what your boss says. So you see, we can do the same action, but with the right mindset of really acknowledging that there is a hierarchy structure. So let me give you an example of a woman who worked for a public company in Canada, and they had an actual hierarchy structure where she was a lower level manager and she was actually not allowed to meet with the managing director. So this is what she's been told. She wasn't told this by the managing directors, but she's told this by all the middle level bosses who, by the way, are also in middle management. So they're sort of stuck in their role. And so then what they tell everybody below them is you can never meet with the people at the top. So this is word on the street. There's this hierarchy. One of the reasons that hierarchy structure and the reason you're being told that is because if every lower level manager wants to meet with the managing director, well, that's a waste of the managing director's time. And so we can't have a lot of people at the bottom just like constantly occupying their time with problems, with frustrations, with annoyance, or even presenting ideas to the managing directors, because you can present an idea to the managing director, but they can't do anything about it unless your boss is on board. So there's a reason. We have to acknowledge that there's a reason for this is in place, and you can break free from that structure. So here is how she did it. I instructed her to have a conversation with her boss, knowing that her boss was going to say no to her. So what you're going to do is you're not going to actually ask for permission, but you're going to inform. So this is what she did. She said, I am going to reach out to, let me just put a fake name, and I don't even remember his name, but Jim. I'm going to reach out to Jim because I want to schedule a 20-minute meeting with him just about, professional development. I just want to have a conversation with him. I've never actually met him, and I would like to meet with him. So she's not going to ask for permission. She also knows that her boss is going to advise against it. So we're looking at it as for what it is. This is honest, true opinion. So she's going to ask her boss, who, again, let me remind you, is also a middle manager, just at a higher level. And she's going to tell her boss that she is going to reach out to Jim. She doesn't even know if Jim's going to say yes yet, but she's going to tell her boss This is really important because now we're not just saying, screw it, I don't care what they say. But she has to be really careful not to ask for permission. So in this particular case, her boss immediately said, no, you can't really do that. That's not how it works here. And so my client was armed and ready. And she said, yes, I understand all of that. And I know that that's how it typically happens. But I would like to reach out to him anyway. And I want him to tell me no. And her boss said, once again, do whatever you want, but just know he's going to tell you no. Okay, so that's how it ended. That is a wonderful conversation. She informed her boss, and her boss was the naysayer about it, but she wasn't asking for permission. She had her backup plan, knowing what her boss was going to say. And then she reached out to Jim anyway. Jim immediately replied to her email and said, yes, I would love to do that. I would love to meet with you. I've never met with you before. Then in that conversation, he commented how, nobody ever reaches out to him and how he'd love to hear more about what's happening at the ground level. And he wants to get to know some of the early managers, but nobody ever connects with him. And she said, well, I'm often told that I can't. He's like, oh, I'm glad you did it anyway. That's amazing. All right. So now what she's done is she has, let's remind you, because of this middle management mentality, she's made her boss a little bit jealous. But she did tell her boss. So she didn't go around her boss's back. She didn't make her boss angry. She confused her boss. These are two very different things. Okay. I don't mind confusing the bosses and be like, how did that happen? I didn't think he wanted to meet with anybody. Then she had regular conversations with him because he really enjoyed the conversation. It was short and sweet. She had a great connection call. She didn't complain. She brought value to the conversation. He was excited to meet with her again in a couple of months. And then eventually he created a role for her. So he actually pulled her out and he said, hey, we've got this other role in this other team that I want you to lead. So she got a promotion. She moved to a different team. Why? Because she broke free of the middle management mentality that says that there is hierarchy, that I'm not allowed to meet with the people at the top. Okay. And so when you can look at your middle management mentality, you acknowledge it, you say, okay, this is the structure that's set up. I understand the system. It's annoying. It's frustrating. I'm going to work within the system to create my own rules. That is how you find yourself in a higher level leadership position, and you actually start to have recognition, power, and influence. You have to first see that mentality that is holding you back from making into these higher level positions. And when you can understand and you can say to yourself, oh, okay, I see what I'm doing. I am operating under either the be told what to do, wait to be told what to do mentality, or I am operating under taking feedback at face value mentality, or I am operating under the hierarchy mentality. Then you can say to yourself, how do I break free from this? I'm still a middle manager. I get it. This is not an ideal situation. I'm not this head CEO in charge where I can just do whatever the heck I want. But I can push these boundaries in a way that actually allows me to have freedom. When you can break free of that middle management mentality, you have choices. You are deliberately managing your career. You are taking ownership. You are taking your career back into your hands. And then whatever recognition, power, and influence that you get, or don't get, by the way, but whatever recognition, power, and influence that you actually receive is going to be on your own terms so you can keep going. When I say you don't get it, the writing becomes very clear on the wall for my clients that this is not the organization or the group or the boss or whatever situation for them. So the other thing about breaking free of this middle management mentality is it becomes very obvious very quickly that you need to get the heck out of there. And why? Exactly why and who you're going to be in the interview process to get your next job so that you have that ability to break free of those boundaries along the way. So that's your job for this week. I want you to take some action to start to acknowledge some of those places where I'm really acting like a middle manager. And let me know. Definitely send me an email. Send me a direct message on LinkedIn. If you don't know my information, it's Stacy Mayer. You can find me on LinkedIn at the very least, and I read all of my direct messages. Let me know where you're holding yourself back in that middle management mentality. And I can direct you to some other podcast episodes. We're at like 260 plus at this point. So there are a lot of episodes where I can begin to show you really practical hands-on ways that you can begin to break free from middle management and start to get the recognition, power, and influence that you already deserve. Thank you all so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Bye. Before you go, I have a question for you. Do you know how close you are to your next promotion? Really? Not what your boss has told you, not what you even believe to be true, but have you actually taken the time to sit down, take an assessment, review the 5 categories that it takes to get promoted into senior executive leadership positions and decided where you fall in each category and given yourself a ranking on a scale of 1 to 10 of how close you are to getting your next promotion? Have you done this? Well, now's your chance. If that feels interesting to you and you're like, hey, I want to know exactly how close I might actually be or how far away you might be and what it's going to take to get you even closer, then I invite you to take my promotability quiz. This is a quiz that I put together with practical tips that actually tell you where you're lacking and where you're winning. What are the areas that you actually need to improve and not necessarily what your boss is telling you all the time so that you can take concrete steps towards landing that next promotion and changing the face of the leadership table. Go to yourpromotabilityscore.com to take your free assessment today.